Hi, I'm Jason Washington King and welcome to talking about vocational currency. It's an interesting thing, and I think the title really says it all. There's so many people who are grappling with this problem at the moment and trying to make it happen for their organisations. So we'll go through that today. So there's a couple of slides there. Obviously I'm from Central Institute of Technology, but more to the point, so the next one is I'm from the Centre for Training Excellence, so that involves training the vet professional, and one of the things we've really been trying to do as an organisation is that industry currency factor. So I wanted to start off with something of my first experience of currency. So I put this up as a separate slide because I don't have the copyright for these pictures. So this goes back to when I was a young lad, and I was sitting with my dad and I was talking about a new car that came out and how fantastic it was, and wow. And I said to my dad, how did somebody think up this? So this thing's got a supercharger on it, it's got a turbocharger, it's got disc brakes, it's got all the bells and whistles, it's got all the greatest things in the world. And my dad said, well, somebody didn't. He said, somebody originally came up with this. They came up with the Benz motor wagon, as they called it, back in 1886, and that was the car they built. So it was a single cylinder. I mean, look at it. That's what they came up with. But currency-wise, currency, 130 years later, here's probably a bit more of the car we would like. So what I would say to you is industry currency, think about that in relation to the people you're teaching and where they're going to be going in the future. They're not going to be going to this one here. They're going to be going to this. So think about that for your currency for your students. It's not about competency. Today we're going to talk about currency, and that's going to be where it's all at. So we'll have to just quickly switch back over. Thank you so much for that. All right. I wonder if I grab that and then I can just scroll through as we go, I think. So if I can just... Okay, so Taming the Vocational Currency Beast. Now I thought that was a reasonable title because really for some of our lecturing staff, I'm a principal lecturer at Central as well as a manager in CTE, and lecturers are really struggling with this. And we're a vet provider, we're a large vet provider, and we have been for a long time. So today I'd like to cover a couple of things. What is vocational currency? So identifying some evidence options for you that you can take. So this is a bit of a build on from what Claire talked about. Claire sort of talked about the standards. I'm going to talk about hopefully some practical things that hopefully you can take away. Capture, map, verify evidence. We'll talk about that. Oh, sorry. And then we'll go back to previous. Sorry, I apologise. Some good practice, or what is good practice and what does that involve? And then the last one is innovative ways to create evidence. Now, I've been doing quite a bit of work with schools in relation to their industry currency, not their competency. We'll talk a little bit about that, but not too much. Been doing a fair bit of work with those guys, and I've been trying to provide inventive ways for them to actually do this and be able to get that done so it will get through an audit and it will do well. I mean, that's really part of the process. So, of course, we know in vet there is the dual professional. At the Centre for Training Excellence, we talk about this a lot. The vet professional, of course, is a dual professional. You have the vet component, and we need currency in that as well. Okay, but that currency there seems to be much more simple for people to do. They go and do a course about RPL or about clustering or about assessment or about validation and moderation. It's not such a big deal. But the part we really struggle with is industry professional. That's the other part of our currency and the things that we need to do. So industry competency, at least to the level assessed, and that's what Claire talked about, but industry currency is the thing we're going to talk about today. Industry competency, many people are going now and at the schools, and again I'm talking about them, so vet in schools, a lot of schools are simply going with you have to RPL the qualification you're teaching. So I agree that the process of providing evidence to say that you are competent without RPLing is the same type of process. But I would then say to people, just be a little bit careful if you just get the qualification you're teaching, because if you change the electives, it won't be current. And also if you change the qualification or if the training package changed, you're then going to need to RPL the new qualification. So there are some things there for people to consider. That's all. The mapping process is the same, and it is an extensive mapping process, but I would consider that if you're going to go about it that way. Vocational currency. So this is in an ever-changing world, I think this is really where it's at. So we need to make sure that we meet this challenge and that we go through this challenge in a way where we can do it systematically, but also that we can do it in the right way. So I took this out of the current standards, current industry skills directly relevant to the training and assessment being provided. Sounds pretty simple, really, doesn't it? That's all we have to do. To be current, we just have to be doing that. But of course, the issue is, for so many of us, is we're training people full time. So then when do we have the time to go out into our industry and do that? Now, I've been teaching in sport and rec mostly, so I'm a coach. I've been a coach for 25 years. So therefore, I coach every single week. I coach a squad of 50 athletes. So therefore, that is part of my currency. Not all of it, because I then have to go and do updated coaching courses. I have to do a number of other things to keep current. Must be evident in delivering assessment. That's a part I'm going to talk about a little bit later, but that's the key. That's the clincher. I'll talk about that in a little while. I wanted to go through some options for evidence in relation to industry currency, because I think that's important that we talk about that. If people have any questions about any of these, please ask. I agree, working in industry just on a placement doesn't give you industry currency. You need to look at what are you delivering, what way are you delivering it, and then go out and do a placement that reflects that or gives you the new information about the new technology to be able to bring that into your classroom and teach your students those things about what is current. Can't just go out there and just do it randomly. You know, there's lots of different things to do in sport, but you may not be able to necessarily get that in that area. So liaise with industry, meetings, emails, and again, this is only part of the process, but at least if you say, look, we are talking to industry, we've talked to them, the structure of our course looks like this, and these are the reasons why we've chosen these electives, because these people within industry who are industry leaders have said that students coming out need these particular things. And that's just as important as what you're delivering in the classroom. The structure of your courses and your qualifications is just as important. So you need to think about that. Why did we cluster things this way, or why did we put these things together as skill sets? Because industry, and here's the consultation we had with industry, it looks like this. We'll talk about that a bit later. These are the things that they've told us need to be done, so therefore we've gone about it in that way. View latest industry equipment or facilities. This can be very, very important in relation to if you have an industry that's changing very quickly. And I think of, you know, I did my sports science degree in 1997. I think I finished my undergraduate. So I think of how much sport has changed since then. You know, back then EPO was the big thing. Well, now gene doping's a big thing. You know, so there's so many changes, not in the way that they do that, but even technology. All the technology involved. People who, I know this is WA, of course, so of course we're the footy state, so everybody watches AFL, and that's okay. But the fact of the matter is they've all got their little GPS units on their backs. That's not to tell you whether they run fast or how far they run. That's old school. That's back 1990s. They're now working on velocity curves, whether they're decrementing, whether they're slowing down, how many turns they do, what speed they do when they turn off the left, turn off the right. All of those sorts of things are being built in. So industry currency means I need to go out and talk to the West Coast Eagles about what they're doing, if I'm going to do that. I really liked, before we talked about a member of an industry or association or committee. Now, I would actually, I do apologise, it's not on that slide there, but I would actually put in active member. And that's a really key thing. I'm an active member. Yes, I'm a member of the association. Well, that's great. Yeah, that's a quarter of a tick. But the other 3/4 of the tick is I'm actually an active member, and these are the things I did in relation to the association or being on committee making changes. This would be rules, regulations, all those types of things that are involved in associations or in an environment for whatever board it is you're part of. 10 workshops, conferences and training. That's a bit of a gimme. Everybody kind of goes, yeah, well, that's okay. Again, they need to be related to what you're teaching. Both the process that you're teaching, but also the way that you're teaching and what's actually involved in those units. You need to map it down to that level. Subscribe to Industry Journal newsletter. Now, I should have written there, again, I do apologise. Subscribe, read, and actually use your industry newsletter. And that kind of makes sense, because if we just subscribe to it, we go, yeah, it was great, yep, it goes in the bin, or it's electronic, even better, delete. Isn't that the most famous one? Delete, delete, we don't worry about it too much. That needs to be activated, and I'll talk about that in one of the slides in the future, about best practice. Other media, websites and newspapers, they can be very relevant depending on what sort of industry you're in and what things are currently happening. You know, we all know about the internet. You can Google everything. I think it was John Howard who said, just Google it. I think that was his words. You know, just Google it is fine, and that's good, and it can be a useful source of information for people, but then you need to say, how does that actually interact with what I'm doing? How did that inform the way I've gone about things? How did I then compare that to other things I've found and use it in relation to that? And that's very, very important in relation to the way that you go about that. So after we've engaged with industry, and that is the important thing about currencies, engaging with industry in all those different ways, we then possibly need to start to think about how are we going to show or demonstrate that we've done that. So keeping evidence, have a journal, put something online, have some sort of matrix or some way that you're going to go about saying these are the things I have done and these are the reasons why they're important. Essentially, we have a thing, we always come up with an acronym for everything. VCAL, I don't even know what that means. Vocational Currency Activity Log. Yes, well done, Jason. That's what it means. But what we've got then is we've got 4 different areas. 2 are related to your vet qualifications and 2 are related to your industry qualifications. On that, we don't just say, yep, I did this, it was great. We actually say, I went to this conference, these are the things I learnt in this conference, it's in the boxes below, these are the things I learnt, and this is how it's affected my delivery of what I'm doing for my students in these particular units, or we go with clusters, so it might be in this cluster. Later on, that'll be mapped to the unit level as well. But that's so that person can prove they are actually vocationally current. It's very important. This, of course, and Claire was talking about this in relation to competency, which is relevant, but I think in relation to currency, it's even more relevant. Put a matrix together of the units you're teaching and say, these are the things I've done that relate to those. The great thing about this, it's not just about what you've done and to say, yep, I'm ticking it off, that's fantastic. And I'm glad that Claire was here, what auditors actually want to see is, what am I going to do in the future to cover some of the gaps that I have? Because we all have gaps, we can't deny that. No matter how unbelievably fantastic you are, there will still be some gaps in your knowledge or in the things that you're doing. So therefore, the purpose of this is to say, these are the things I've done, this is my future plan to cover in some of those areas that maybe I need to update my currency. So, and that's a challenge in itself. For somebody to verify these things, you need somebody who's industry competent and current as well to verify these things. Otherwise, just a manager in your area might go, yep, that looks fine to me, looks great. But if I don't have any knowledge of what that looks like or what that means, that's really difficult. One way around that, depending on the size of your RTO or the way you're going to go about it, you may have a manager sign off ultimately, but there may be somebody else in your area that actually will look at, and that may be academic leader, some sort of person who's maybe the team leader or something like that within that teaching team, or if you've got a very small team, it may be somebody they know from another RTO who can just verify that and say, yes, they've done that.
Key point there, question. If there's actually no industry that has that's basically a peak body and it's a sporting area where they don't always follow the vet process, and they are considered the peak body, is that sufficient in some aspects? I'm talking about sailing and boating, yachting in Australia type situation.
Great question.
They do have an RTO status, but they only do the delivery, the trainer, but they don't validate even their own instructors for sailing or powerboating for that say. They only deliver a program, yet they are the national peak body.
Okay, good. So the question is, if you're going to verify somebody's currency in relation to a particular industry area, does it matter whether that peak body is not in the vet structure? Is that what you're asking?
Correct, yes.
I don't think that makes any difference at all, because what it is, the key word here is it's industry. Yeah. So industry could be anything. So industry, I think, when I was a plumber for 11 years, I think of the plumbing board, they're not in the vet, they've had some input into that, and so with the sailing industry, have had possibly had some input into the training package, but they don't necessarily be governed by that, and that's absolutely fine. It just needs to be somebody in that industry area able to say that. So if I'm doing something for, I coach soccer at the moment, so if I'm doing something for soccer and I've just done my B licence, Football West or the FFA could be my industry currency, people who verify that yes, this is industry current and this is fine. That would be absolutely fine for those people to do that, I would say. And again, it's just ways of finding those people to do it. And again, once the auditors come in, you say, well, yes, this is the peak body for the area that I work in. Here's the contact details, here's the person that I talk to, and they can then follow that up. If you're talking about audit type situations, they can follow that up. And that's a valid way to do it.
Well, see, many of the peak bodies of that nature are coming under federal umbrella for funding. So
yep, that's right. Well, certainly if they're under those federal umbrellas for funding, they would have good governance and have to do all those sorts of things anyway. So they should be fine in relation to that. It doesn't matter what industry it is. It doesn't matter where you work or what you do. It would just be a case of getting them to do that. This can be somebody in your work team who could do this, but then of course you would need somebody external just to sort of tick off on that as well, because obviously there's been some issues with that, with RTOs kind of ticking each other off on things, allegedly.
So we're looking at verifying the evidence rather than say verifying verifying your actual hands-on competency?
Well, no, that's a great question. So the question was, are we verifying their competence or are we verifying their hands-on skills? They would be the same.
Yeah, well,
If it's
in terms of the evidence you produce, in terms of showing where how you've maintained your currency,
yep.
rather than either working in their workshop for them to verify your skills, your actual skills.
Great question. So I think I can answer that very, very simply. So the question was, is it just verifying a document they've got in relation to their skills, or is it actually going in there and watching them do it? I would say both. It would depend on what it is. But I think it's unlikely that an auditor is going to come there and say, okay, Jason, I want you to run a training session. They're more likely to say, yes, I can see here that you've done this particular qualification. It covers this, this and this, which is related to these units here. I think that's more likely they would do that. That would be the end game for the audit purposes, but for verifying it, you're exactly right. The person who is the industry person may actually come and see you in that workshop, and they would verify, yes, I saw this person do these practical skills. And that's great. That's a great piece of evidence. It's a third-party piece of evidence, but they've actually been there, and they're industry, and they can say that and they can do that. Yeah, definitely. That's a good question. So there's two parts to that, if you like. Are people happy with that? Good practice. Good practice is and again, this is very tough, and probably it depends. Probably if your organisation is too small and you have very, very few people to be able to help each other do this, it's difficult. But also if you're very large, it becomes very difficult as well, because it's kind of this unwieldy beast where you've got lots of different areas that need all these different things, and you can't just get somebody to come in and generically do some training for people. So therefore there's a problem with that. So, but be very, if you're going to put this in place and you want to try to achieve this, I think being systematic about it is really important. It needs to be demonstrated that it's ongoing. And there's been a magic catch cry in vet for a couple of years, continuous improvement are the words they use. Opportunity for continuous improvement. Well, certainly within the TAFE sector, within the government organisation, we're talking a lot about that. And that's a fair point. You want to say, this is what we've done, this is where we're currently at. So a bit of evidence of what we've done, this is where we're currently at. But more to the point is, this is how we're going to move going into the future. And if they can see, I think if people can see that, they can see that, yes, you have got a systematic approach to this, and people will be continuously updating things as we go along. It won't just kind of be done till now, and then we forget about it for a few years, and then, oh, fine, we've got to do some industry currency, and we kind of run off and do a bit of stuff again. So recorded and verified, and that part of systematic would be recording of that information, verifying from an industry person, then maybe somebody, depending on how big your organisation is, maybe somebody from that. Maybe a manager may sign off on that. So identify and address gaps. That is just as important as saying, yes, I've done all of this. I think that in relation to competency-based training, for 100% of people to pass all the time or get through all the time or be deemed met standard or whatever, however you want to put it, that maybe raises some questions about the robustness of that process. It may be that the training is unbelievably fantastic and everybody can get through, and that may be the case, but that's something that that is a consideration. So what we want to do is make sure that, yes, we can say this. If you find you don't have any gaps in relation to your industry currency, that's fine. You can say that, yep, we're up to date, these are the things we've got. However, our plan for the future is we'll cover these things in the next 6 months, these things are 6 months after that. Maybe have like a 2 or 3 year plan going forward to cover off all those things. And again, it depends on your training package. What training package is pretty much changing depending on what you've got. I've been working in massage recently as the principal lecturer there. Their training package is from 2007. Yes, be horrified. You should see that thing. It's a monstrosity. It's terrible. Compared, because obviously there's other training packages since 2007. They're on their 3rd version since then. So very old training package, really unwieldy, not nice to use, very all over the place. So, but part of that is making sure that we address those gaps as we go along. So maybe within the 3 year cycle that we think that training package is relatively to last, we would ensure that we're going to cover all those units that we're delivering or something like that for your future plan. This is the part that I'm really passionate about, and I think this is, if you get nothing else out of today, this is it. Nothing else out of today from this talk. I have no problem with that whatsoever. This is where it's at. And I know this should say your delivery, so I do apologise. The only typo I've got in the whole thing, and I saw it last night, I went, no, but that's okay. Nobody's seen it, but they have now, so it's okay. You need to show how your industry engagement has changed the way you've gone about your course. And that's everything from the way that you structure your course, to the way that you deliver your course, to the experiences you give the students in that course, to the way that you assess in that course. Everything needs to come, or hopefully come back to that. Why? Because industry, hopefully, depending on who your industry are, hopefully your industry are going, these are the type of graduates that we need. These are the people in the workforce that we need right now. So the example I gave of that 7-year-old training package for massage, relatively unlikely that people who are doing that massage degree right now are going to be coming out getting exactly the skills they want in society. Because our society has changed. We have an ageing population. People need different types of massage, different types of things are becoming more and more important, more relevant, more valid. So those types of things, and what we really want to see is that we're giving our students, whoever they are, whether they're doing a Cert 2 in business, in school, in high school, or whether in the vet sector, or whether any type of RTO, doing anything, we want to see that they're getting the best and the most up-to-date information they can. You don't want them doing the Benz wagon there in 1886. You want them to be doing the latest and greatest. You want to make sure that they've got those things that are relevant for now and they're important for now. It's really, really important. So has anybody got any questions on that? So remember, if there's nothing else, that's it, typo and all. Make sure you get that down. This is the part where I think I've certainly seen some pretty cool things that people have come up with in relation to getting the balance between their students getting an unbelievable learning experience and ensuring that their lecturing staff or their teaching staff are also industry current. So one of the ones, the guest speakers in sport and recreation at Central this year, we put in a program called Trends and Issues, we called it. And what we did is every single week somebody from industry would come in and talk to the students about a particular thing. So we go, oh, that's not really that great, but we would engineer the questions that we had, students would ask their own questions, engineer the questions in order for those to cover certain things and covering our own currency as well as the students' currency. So people like Rick Charlesworth, I mean, who is more up to date than Rick Charlesworth of elite training programs? Dual gold medalist Kate Starr came in and talked to the students as well. So the current coach, I can't remember his name for the life of me. I think it's the Lynx, they're the basketball, women's basketball team, are they called the Lynx? Or is it the, nobody knows, do they? No, the who? No, the Opals is a national team, but he's the coach of the WA team, the WA women's national basketball team. He came in and talked to the students about rebuilding a program, because when he got to the program, they hadn't won a game for 2 years. And he talked about that. So that for the students is relevant, but it's not just about running a training session, that's about building a program, dealing with people, people management, all those types of things. So therefore we looked at the units we're teaching and we ensured that we were covering off certain things within those units. So I guess my words for that is be sophisticated in the way you go about it. It's a bit like an assessment tool. The more sophisticated you are in the designing of the assessment tool, the easier it is for the students to use and the easier it is for you to be able to assess them and make sure you're getting what you want. So they're things that are very, very important. So the other one I have is industry workshops. So in beauty therapy at Central, every single year, and I'm the principal lecturer for beauty therapy, yes, hilarious. But they get product development every year. So people like Fleur de Mer, all those sorts of people, they come in and they do a product day. So not only do they get to see the products, the lecturers and the students, but they get to use the products and do that. So therefore, that's not everything for their industry currency. They still need to go out and work in a salon and do some of those sorts of things, but it certainly gives them some of that product knowledge, which a large part of the Cert 4 especially for beauty therapy is sales. So knowing product development, how they're going, what's changed, what's new, that sort of thing is very important for those people. External activities is a very interesting one. Now, of course, Central, we don't have trades. We have a lot of the creative industries type stuff. So I'm going to use the example for music at Central. They run their own gigs. Not one gig, they run like a series of gigs throughout the year. So some students will do this one, some students will do that one, the lecturers will run this one. Well, you can't be any more industry current than working with bands, booking bands, getting them to do a gig, you know, dealing with all the hotel owners and whatever else to do that gig. That's part of the way they keep their industry currency. And also they've got their own bands where they do gigs as well. So they're very, very into that. That's something they're very passionate about, but they're very much into that, and that's the way they go about that. The other one we have in the creative industries where you've got textile design and the art students, they actually run their own gallery. They run a gallery and they also run exhibitions. So the students might run those, but the lecturers, well, I think the lecturers run the gallery, and I think the students run some of the exhibitions. So that's industry currency. It's just outside the parameters of their normal work enough, where they are dealing with the general public, they're dealing with all those things, they're dealing with the people to book the facilities and do all those things. They're outside of that. That's something they can do. It sounds a little bit creative, but it's a good way to do it. It involves all those things that are involved in those qualifications of being an artist and doing those things. The last one I wanted to use was in relation to schools. So schools, of course, they have their own curriculum and they're doing a number of other things, but vetting schools is very challenging. Why? Because we have so many acronyms. That's the first thing a school teacher said to me. They said, there's way too many acronyms. I can't understand any stuff. I'm like, oh, sorry about that. We have a lot of acronyms and we have a lot of things that we do that are the same, but we just give it a different name. Or that has to be a learning plan. It's like, isn't it just like a schedule of what's going on? Anyway, depending on how you go about it, oh, this is an assessment. So we can't call it a test, we have to call it an assessment. So it's all those things. They seem very small, but there's a shift. And I'm glad they've got some different names because school curriculum is maybe here and vet is running alongside. So they are slightly different and they do require slightly different things. So doing that vet in school stuff is very, very difficult because a lot of teachers go, well, I'm a teacher. Of course I know how to do that. It's like, yeah, but do you do it in industry? That's the question. They go, well, no, I don't. I don't actually work in it. And home economics is one of the ones we're talking about. I can't remember the vet qualification, so I do apologise. I did look today, but I couldn't find it. Home economics, and they said, oh, actually what we do, the P&C do two get-togethers a year or whatever it is, 2 functions a year, and we cater that. Is it on the school grounds? No. Okay, well, what do you do? Oh, we book the venue, we do everything else, do all the catering, they give us the order and we do all that sort of stuff. And they don't actually deal with the school, they deal with the P&C. Well, that would be industry currency, surely. It's not at the school, it's not within their school duties, it's completely separate. So great opportunity for the students to learn, but also the teacher can get verified by that person they did the work for that they do have some industry currency. Not the only thing they can do, but it certainly is a way that they can actually show that they're doing something within there. So there's ways to go about it. Even if you look at, and I apologise to go back to phys ed, but the phys ed teachers, if they're organising an inter-schools carnival for 400 kids, or one of my friends, Tony Cavajar, runs it's the primary school soccer competition or their tournament week or whatever it is, it's like 800 kids or whatever at that. So, and that's not at school, that's in a separate oval that he has to book everything, go through the whole process, do all the scheduling, do all those things and do all of that. That would be industry currency, wouldn't it, surely? If you're teaching a Cert 2 in sport and rec, where you have to plan a training session, put it together and do all those things, that would be a way that you could show industry currency, I believe. So again, depends on how people see that, but there certainly is ways that you can go about it and do it, where as soon as you're getting outside the realms of the normal role, so getting up here and teaching is not industry currency. It's about being out there and actually doing things involved with industry and how that works. Validation moderation is an interesting one, and of course with the new standards, validation moderation is going to have to be external. Validation moderation, yes, I think that's a really positive step, and I'm hoping that people will use it in a really positive way to engage with industry. Very, very difficult, and I do agree with people who are sitting in the room going, yeah, we tried to, and industry didn't know what we were talking about. I agree. But I think what we've got to do, much as the same with the school system, is try to convert that into human speak. Human speak means, what do you need these people to do in the workplace? Oh, okay, yeah, they do this, this and this. Okay, so the job role looks like this. So what type of skills would you think they might need to know, or might need to have? What sort of knowledge do you think, what stuff might they need to know to do that? So rather than knowledge and skills, we put it in a way where industry is actually going to be able to keep that and use that in a way. We consult them, we have a chat to them about it, they can validate and moderate our stuff and say, yeah, if somebody did this, I think they would be competent to do this particular thing within our organisation. That'd be a positive step. But that's also a way, then part of that process is that industry currency. We can say, well, we went out to this organisation, we had a look at their workshop, they took us through, we saw all these different things, so therefore we have an idea of what they're using as current equipment within that industry. We have now gone away and got training on that equipment. We've actually closed the loop because we bought some of that equipment for our students, and now we're training our students on how to use that equipment. And therefore we get a rather nice cycle of positive reinforcement, but also industry currency for people without having to go, oh, what am I going to do this year? Oh, well, I don't know, I can't think of... And doing the same thing each year is not industry currency either. You need to do some things and then do something else. So each year with my coaching, I've done a different aspect of coaching. I've done a different part here than I've done here. Then I'm people management, I've done program management, I've done different types of things that you need to do. And that then means that hopefully I can stay industry current rather than having one stream or one thing that I can do. I was talking to somebody out there in relation to traineeships, and that's one of the most challenging areas. Really is challenging because traineeships, a lot of it's third-party evidence, but also the other problem is that what we find with our traineeship lecturers is that they have a lot of qualifications to cover. Face-to-face, you tend to say, yep, this is our offering, this is what it looks like, and they come in and they do the training. Traineeships, people go, well, actually, our workplace is different. We want these 3 units just here because they suit us. Then that person's got, in order for them to be able to assess those, they're going to have to be able to get some currency in that area. So that's a huge challenge, I think. So I think I'll finish. I wanted to finish on a couple of things that people have said to me in the past. Hopefully I'll get it. Yeah. I just want to finish this. So I think if we think about industry currency, we'll come back to something that somebody once said to me after a staff meeting we had. They said, what did you want to get out of that? I'd said something in that staff meeting that maybe wasn't the most diplomatic or the best way that I presented it. And that person said to me, what did you want to get out of that? So if we think of our industry currency, what do we actually want to get out of it?
You get a number of things. One is compliance, to make sure that you're presenting it correctly and appropriately.
Yep.
2, your own self-development to make sure you are current with what you're required to do.
Yep.
And basically it's an achievement situation.
Yeah, good. So I like that. So the 3 things that were said there in relation to industry currency, one was to be compliant.
That's right.
One was to ensure that you're up to date and you know what's going on. The other one is for personal achievement and that moving forward. I really like that. The first one, I would like to see us kind of park... Yeah. No. The first one, I'd like to see us park a little bit of compliance. Compliance is cool, and okay, we all have to do that, but I'd like to just pose one thing. How about we try to be excellent or aspirational? Imagine that. We're dealing with currency, and rather than going, oh my goodness, I've got to go through this stupid course again. Man, I've had enough. We actually go, no, this is actually going to make me better, and it's actually going to make things easier for me. So that when my students do say, hey, what about this? Or what about that? I can actually say, well, this is what they're currently using at BHP right now in their workshops, this exact machine. And that's been part of the stuff they've had to do in beauty therapy at Central in the last 3 years. They've moved to a brand new building. They got rid of all the old stuff and bought a whole lot of new equipment that is industry current. And that's required because when those people go to a salon and go to work somewhere, they have to be able to use those machines and not go, oh, I saw a machine that looked a little bit like this, but it only had 2 wheels rather than 4. We'll see how we go. They need the latest, and being that aspirational and trying to improve and have that achievement and move that forward, I think that's really, really important.
That's why we're all here today.
Yeah, that's right, and that's exactly right. Coming here today, but as I said, taking all of this doesn't really matter. I just want that one thing. Put it back into your teaching or if you're leading people within the vet space, take it back into leading people in that vet space. And say, yep, industry currency, yeah, it's about this, but let's be good at it. Let's be great at this. Let's make it work for us. Rather than being a slave to the beast, let's tame that beast and make it ours and say, look, we own you and this is the way we're going to go about it because we're going to do it well. And I think that's the best way for us to look at it, personally. Is that it? Is it? I've got 10 minutes left. We've got questions. Okay. Questions, people. Questions. Not one. Must be time to go.
I would add to your excellence is best practice and quality rather than compliance.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's so important. Oh, sorry. You wanted to add to...
Really a question.
No, it's a statement. You wanted to add to the fact that rather than being about compliance, it should be about excellence and quality and best practice and moving forward as well. Part of what happens, and yeah, I guess I can't speak for other people, but sometimes in my professional life I've kind of gone, yeah, this is going pretty good now. And you get into that little danger zone where, yeah, it's going pretty good. And then suddenly it's still going pretty good. And suddenly you go, oh, maybe they went a bit too good, maybe they need to do something else. And I think there's that opportunity to do that. And I've taught in the university sector as well as the vet sector. And that's probably the one thing I miss a little bit from the university sector is those students would go, well, tell me about that. No, I challenge you. I want to know about this. So why can't we have our students in the vet sector looking at things that way and going, well, actually, how are they doing in the industry? Why don't you tell me and show me what's happening out there right now? You know, and I know that Perth, WA, certainly has had a massive mining boom. But we think about the way they mined 10 years ago, even compared to how they do it now, never known 20 years ago compared to how they do it now. You're talking about a totally different thing. Unbelievably different thing. So, and that's the same, I don't know what industries people come from, but that would be the same for every industry. I can't think of any industry in the last 10 years that's, you know, and Claire talked about anatomy. I taught anatomy at uni for quite a while, and it's very, very true. The anatomy stuff, as in how many bones, what the muscles are and stuff like that, that's all set and has been for quite a while. But the physiology stuff, well, it has. I mean, we've known about that stuff for quite a while, being fair about it. But the physiology stuff, we're learning every single day. Every single day something new comes out about the body. Hey, by the way, if we do this, we do that. I had one of the teachers from fitness the other day saying to me, I'm not allowed to eat any sugar anymore. Sugar's out now. You can eat as much fat as you want, that's okay, but no sugar anymore. And I was like, come on, how am I going to survive? No chocolate. It's like, but they're the things, they're the cycles that we've gone through, and the understanding that we have is so much greater. So, and that's, you know, and that's just the same for any industry you can think of. You know, in sailing, I go back to being proud. I'm not originally from WA, but I'll say that I am. Being us proud WA people that we are, and think about that. That wing kill, if they never did that, Americans have been cheating for years. They just made it so nobody else could win, and then suddenly we won. And they went, what's going on with that?
Cheating of their own game.
So, and then Switzerland won, and they don't even have any sea. That's okay.
They're good on the lakes.
I don't know about that, but they're pretty good. So, yeah, but those things will change, guaranteed. What we can guarantee is it will be change and that things will be different. And when they are, we need to be those people who are the leaders of that change rather than being the people who our students come out and go, oh, I didn't really learn that. I didn't really see that. I don't know what's happening with that. I would be a bit upset if my students were those people who went out and did that. So I think that's really important. Important for them and important for us. So, any other questions? None. They need the magnums. That's it. Thank you so much, people.
Authorised by the Government of Western Australia, Perth.